community outreach work.
The Bliss Business Podcast, the show about empathy, connection, and consciousness in business. Today's episode is brought to you by Zero Company, your paid search, social media, and programmatic ad experts.
Welcome back to the podcast, everyone. I'm Steven Sakach here with my co-host, Mike Liskey, and our special guest today. So many organizations, especially in the nonprofit and service sectors, face resource constraints that limit their ability to fully serve their communities. Our guest today is helping serve those who serve our communities. And we're going to get into that in a little bit. So today we're exploring what it takes to build strong, connected communities and how leaders can create systems that support collaboration and amplify impact. Mike, introduce our special guest today.
Oh, Steve, I'm delighted too. So with us today is Noah Smock. He's actually the director of resource development at ToolBank USA. And interesting, Noah's career in social justice actually began in Baltimore way back in 2008. And really because he went on to serve from there for more than 2 decades as the executive director of the Baltimore Community ToolBank, where he really helped to expand access to tools and to resources for organizations that are serving their communities. And then now today, through his work with ToolBank USA, he supports a broader movement focusing on equipping really nonprofits and first responders with the tools, equipment, and expertise they need to strengthen and celebrate diverse neighborhoods. In addition to all of this, in his leadership roles, Noah's really served on multiple boards, contributed to behavioral health and community organizations, and has been recognized for his impact, including honors from the Baltimore Orioles, as well as Baltimore Homecoming. So Noah, with that, we are so delighted to have you on our show. Welcome to the Bliss Business Podcast.
Oh, it's so nice to be here. Thank you.
We're glad you're here. So Noah, let's just jump right in, I guess, to the topic that we're talking about today. Like, why is the topic of community building so important today?
Yeah, what's interesting for me. I've had the privilege in my career working in the community, as you mentioned, since 2008, which feels like yesterday, but also feels like a long time ago. I really came in to a role that helped facilitate meaningful engagement with the business and higher ed communities. And through that, in the lens of the nonprofit, but also the overlay of the business community, I really got to see how multiple sectors have to combine efforts intentionally to build what, the community they want to live and work and love in. So I just feel like I've gotten a front row, or maybe like a side view seat of what that looks like in action. Good examples, examples that have grown over time that maybe weren't so successful, but it's an important topic to me because everything we do, all the decisions we make impact our neighbors, and then we put the overlay of this community on top of it. So it's really important that people think intentionally and move with intention towards the community they want to build.
Yeah, when you think about that, when you think about building community, what does that mean in practice beyond the idea? So,
yeah, right. So it could be super abstract, right? Community, what is it? But I think in the small terms, and I think of one big word that comes out is authenticity. So to me, authenticity implies that you have a point of view and then you represent it in a way that is true to that. And I also think about it in the daily, from how you drive, where you throw away your breakfast. All of these things impact kind of the greater community that we live in. And when we highlight challenges, to me, the next sentence is always, what solutions do we have? There are some things to be careful of when we talk about solutions. There's the people who want to go right into solution mode and they don't do the listening. But to me, it's important that there is some intentionality and some listening to multiple sectors within society to really come up with the community that we all want to thrive in.
Yeah, I mean, certainly with the state of the world that it's in today, it definitely seems like a very important work for us to be doing. And I think of it as well, as almost like you were saying, right? This feeling of fellowship that you get with others that kind of results in, maybe similar attitudes, interests, but as well, what are the goals within that community? And so, Noah, maybe I was kind of curious, want to dig in a little bit more in terms of the work that you do. You've kind of focused on providing access, as I mentioned in the intro, to tools and to resources that are empowering others. So just sort of curious, how does that access play a role in building stronger, like more connected communities? And even, what are some of those tools? Because I think our audience, might be even curious about that.
Sure. And I'll give you kind of the really simple, when we talk about tools, we are literally talking about the type of tools you would buy at a hardware store. So shovels, drills. We get a little expansive. We get into special events equipment, Wi-Fi hotspots with data, and tables and chairs. What we say is we consider it, we disrupt the cycle of community groups paying for what we have to share with them. Okay. So we do have a nominal fee at the local level. So for the Baltimore ToolBank, for example, I was the director there for over 11 years. We loan to community organizations, and it has to be at the bottom line a shared benefit for the community, so that the end users, if you will, are people, individuals, but we do it through the sector of community organizations. And it is so simple, but it's also pretty radical. So we call it radical sharing. It's radical because we don't know anyone else who's doing it in our space. I mean, there are certainly some neighborhood level tool shares, which are organic and incredible, but we have a system, we have a tool tracking platform, we have the ability to track the deployments of a given tool over hundreds of uses. But it's also radical in that it's just sharing. We are literally sharing everything from tools and equipment. We also have shared our space, our shipping dock, our storage space. So it's just, how do we activate a community asset for everything the sector needs? And in the community sector, overcommitted, under-resourced, and so that's where we come in.
Yeah, that makes sense. And how have you seen that, I guess, having the access to those really lend itself to building a stronger community, or even, I guess, no pun intended, right? But you have Wi-Fi hotspots, a more connected community.
Yeah. And actually, a really simple example is just on the money side. So in one sense, we save our partners money. I'll give you an example. We had groups when we first started that planted hundreds of trees a year. They had their own equipment. They had their own storage. But after the ToolBank was in Baltimore for more than 5 years, as their tool inventory faded because of loss and attrition and just wearing out, they stopped buying stuff and they started to come to us and borrow the tools, and they didn't have to pay for the overhead to store it. We would take care of that. So over time, those groups were saving money. They took what their budget was in 2010 when we weren't here, compared to their budget in 2016 for tools and equipment, and it probably decreased by 40 to 50%. On the other hand, when you know that you have a tool bank at your disposal, it's not just saving money, it's making brand new things possible, because you simply dream differently about what you can do now that you have high quality tools by the hundreds at your disposal.
Yeah, like you said, it's such a simple idea, but it's also radical in the same way. I was like, I don't know, last year sometime when I first heard about like a small community sharing tools in some way, and I'm just like, well, that's freaking genius, and I've gone from like, I used to own a home and I've got all my tools and everything, and now I'm living in an apartment. Now I'm putting them all in storage, and I'm just looking, well, I don't want to have to buy these again at some point. It's not cheap doing all this. And so you can imagine with a charity or something, they're trying to roll something out, maybe even at scale or something large where they need, they'd love to have 20 people come help, right? But they've only got one shovel, one hammer, 3 hammers and, 2 drills or something, right? And so
that's an enormous force multiplier. I mean, you could just think differently about how many people you can say yes to be involved in your mission.
Yeah, exactly. And they can keep costs focused to whatever their specific mission is. So, hey, so what? No, what are some of the common misconceptions you think about community building?
I think, this is improving over time, but it still is out there, and it's certainly in the kind of mindset of a lot of people, which is that somehow community organizations should be beholden to a vision that's coming from some other stakeholder. Whereas a lot of people in the community sector are kind of on the ground, and they're the grassroots eyes and ears of what building community looks like. And I wouldn't say that they're necessarily the sole experts in that, but everyone has a role to play. If you think of business and community sector and government, all three of those players kind of have to be at the table filling different roles. The way that I've seen it in my work the best is when the right expert is in the center of it. And that usually is a community-based, neighborhood-based type of personality. If people are listening as the center and then developing plans around that to build community, I think that's where it's done best. And so some misconceptions are, we're in a funding landscape, right? I raise money and resources for a living. Sometimes the paradigm can flip and feel like, the people giving the money should be charting the entirety of the vision, when really they should just be a partner in that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think
that's an interesting perspective. I hadn't really thought about it that way.
Yeah, and I appreciate too, like we talk about this a lot of times with some of our franchise, owners, that really some of the best ideas come from the people on the front lines in the, client facing roles. And so that's really key, is to really have that community level sort of input, even on a, big national structure. And the only way you can do that is by trying to actually listen to the folks, in the community and giving them opportunity to lead in their own way.
Yeah. So maybe, we as an agency talk a lot about the importance of connection. Even in our purpose, we've defined that really our purpose as an agency is to build a genuine connection between the clients that we serve and their customers. And so, it's obviously very important. I'm curious, in terms of like the work, or even, suggestions, insights that you might have, how do you maintain connection and really trust across diverse groups in a community? Is there a secret to it? Is it consistency? How do you do that?
I do think consistency is important, and I'll circle back to that in a second. But I also think, and this probably is just my vantage point, because I see so many people that I meet in a business context who are working for a local company. They're coming through our doors as volunteers. And it is amazing to me when a company does it right, when they listen to where their people have passion. So it doesn't have to be the CEO's passion. It could be the front-facing, customer-facing person who wants to see a certain topic area, animal adoption, or hey, a tool bank. If that's their passion area, letting the leadership kind of invest in that. And I don't mean necessarily give, a 6-figure grant, but maybe a day of service. Developing programs where employees can take time off to engage. I mean, I really feel like that builds culture, and it kind of cycles positively within those businesses. And then we get to share a day with them too, which is probably not their normal day. Come help us make tools or fill tool orders. And even at the national level, sometimes disaster relief, not necessarily frontlines disaster relief, but build a disaster relief bucket with certain materials that we're going to distribute to partners. Those kind of moments, we say social capital gets really, really high. and here, the tool bank is interesting. You walk in, you think you're going to talk about shovels and drills and rakes, but you're going to walk out the door thinking about access to resources. And that is really energizing for people. So I know it's a big way to talk about being driven by what employees want to do, I think is a major culture win. And it's a great trend that's really been growing since my career started in 2008.
Yeah. Yeah. That's an amazing insight.
So one of the things we like to talk about on the show is, these sort of systems and structures, so that you can kind of repeat something so it's sustainable. What kind of systems or structures have you seen that make community impact more sustainable? What kind of maybe even processes or little things even you do personally?
Yeah, and actually it goes a little bit back to the former question. Consistency is so important. Early on in my career, I worked with an organization, a business, and I thought they were phenomenal. The person I was in touch with understood what we did. They engaged in a way that was meaningful and respectful. We had people in active programs like youth. So there's only so many ways we can volunteer with youth without disrupting their day. But they were great and they were respectful. But then this thing happened. My contact left. They reorged. They had a new philosophy. And they wanted not to simply repeat with the same partners every year, which is okay. I get variety. But they kind of, they were trying to retrofit this idea of meaningful engagement, and they couldn't. We all of a sudden weren't working with them. They weren't working with a partner that they relied on, and the philosophy had changed. They went from wanting to do one thing to another, and I don't think that's bad. But if that happens too many times in a 3-year cycle, to me, I can see a mile away that they're not serious about engaging in the community. They just want whoever the new person is wants to impress somebody and say, we did A, B, C, and D. Maybe they want to quantify it in a different way, but it's not a meaningful longitudinal relationship. It's more of a one shot here, one shot there. And I think that lack of consistency is really impacts culture internally, but you can see from the outside as well.
Yeah, it's such an important point. And we're kind of talking about this before the show, is like you could have that one individual, right, who's really driven and kind of drives this thing forward. But if it's not systemized in some sort of, part of the DNA of your culture, your company, part of who you are, then as soon as that person leaves, then everything goes sideways with that. And like you said, then you could have someone who's coming in and maybe they just want to check off some box because it looks good instead of it being about who they are.
And I was just going to say too, I think go ahead now.
Oh, no, I was also just going to say, it's just funny because later today, I'm actually meeting with a company who has systems built internally. They're a Fortune 500 company. They've got employees all across the country, and they serve on multiple ToolBank boards across the country. And we're literally doing for their employees. One of our board members in Baltimore is doing a little mini class on how to use the system to maximize benefit for their ToolBank. And that just goes to the point of how important it is to have a system. So for example, this company gives $10 an hour for anybody that volunteers for a ToolBank. They pay the ToolBank $10 an hour, but not all the employees know that, even though the system is there. So also like letting your employees know those systems are there is also a super important part of that.
Yeah, it's an internal marketing thing too. Sometimes it's easier if you can really align, like with the nonprofit, you can align your purpose and say why this is why we're doing it is because, maybe we provide software tools to companies, right? And we also want to help tools to people as some sort of charity. Maybe you can find some sort of tie in there so that it's really about your company, and then you don't hide those little benefits, like you said, like, hey, we actually pay $10 an hour and stuff. It just becomes part of your dialogue within the company, just because that's who you are.
It's something that's so relevant today is this conversation around AI. Noah, so I was kind of looking ahead at the show, at the topics that we were going to discuss today. I'm like, hey, like AI is not mentioned here really anywhere, but maybe this is like a good place to try to plug it in. I don't know. Noah, since we're on the topic of systems, AI is certainly a system. What do you think the impact of AI is going to be? Or is there something that we can do even in the sense of community building when it comes to AI? Either some guardrails. We we could talk about, this, but just curious if you do have any thoughts on, the direction of AI related to community building.
Yeah, I mean, I could think of it in a couple ways. I know it's funny because I'm a grant writer, like not 100% of the time, but a lot of my time is spent literally drafting. And I am my own universe in AI. I take my old thing and I put it in and I say, what would I say about this? Which is just a surreal exercise. If you were to say that 10 years ago, I wouldn't know what that meant. But it's also an effective tool. So I'm thinking specifically from the business lens.
Right.
When we admit that there is value in values-based PR, and there's literally a culture value to saying we support this organization in this way, the due diligence, I think, is super important, because anything that has the power to give you positive press can probably do the equal and the opposite direction. And so even just something as simple as using AI to do a longitudinal history of an organization that you're about to invest time or money in, I think is really good. I say that and I want to put a big asterisk, because not every story you read about a nonprofit with bad press should be taken at surface level. You really have to do your research, but it's totally important that if you're going to be in a business relationship with a cause, that you understand, everything from their ethos, financials, and history. And I think that can be a really fast way to cover a lot of ground.
Yeah. Hopefully being able to, do more research on there. Going back to even the topic we were discussing earlier about systems. I love the fact that the research even shows that having these well-structured systems for collaboration and even resource sharing, like we were talking about, maybe some employees don't even know necessarily what a Fortune 500 company can do, is those contribute significantly to the impact that organization can have. And so one of the things that sort of naturally comes to my mind is when we do have these systems or we do have these programs in place, is what is the measurement? What is the measurement? Like how do you measure? What do you measure?
Yeah, it's a great question, because we certainly can measure and are asked to measure quite often the impact of a dollar or how many dollars we get in the door. But what I think more nuanced systems account for is what is the talent and the time that's poured in. So if we have a company that serves, and I don't want to get too in the weeds, but there are ToolBanks across the country, and then there's ToolBank USA, and we do similar things but slightly different. But that means there are many different boards, for example. So if we have a company that serves on 7 different boards across the country, like that's a way different calculus in terms of the talent and the leadership that's going into a local tool bank. And I think the more nuanced systems understand not just the treasure or the money behind things, but also the time, the testimony, the talent. If we've got an engineer that can help us rewire our batteries to give them longer life, like I don't even know how to quantify what an hour of their time, because that's worth a lot more than just a regular volunteer.
Right.
But these are all the kind of things that you want to do, kind of track and be thoughtful about. And the impact of these companies can just be huge, because they just have people that are wanting to give back within their employee ranks. And it's massive for an organization that really relies on relationships.
And then I guess too, Noah, from your seat and recommendations, are there systems that are definitely the most critical to have in supporting a nonprofit organization sort of at scale? I think organizations that are large enough to have contemplated that giving time to their employees and tracking them. So sometimes we'll host a group and we'll be prompted by their group leader to say, tell them to log their hours in the system, because that's how the company evaluates what their employees value the most. So those kind of systems, and it can be pretty basic, they don't have to be elaborate, but those are super important on the back end for the company to really understand
what it is their employees want to see in the world.
Yeah, it's interesting talking about like this measurement, because a lot of times I think one of the problems in the business world is we're just measuring profit most of the time on everything instead of lives impacted. But nonprofits, you're measuring all the time like that lives impacted, any kind of way you can put that into numbers or things, right? And really, I think at some point businesses need to do more of that kind of measuring, where it's like, hey, not only did we sell A, B, C, and D, last quarter, but this is how many lives we impacted in some kind of positive way. And
I would say too, working with HR and seeing, for example, if we're impacting retention and turnover rates with employees, because it's very gratifying, right, to be able to work with an organization that does this. And then as well from there, Steve, as you were saying, kind of that triple bottom line concept of people, planet, and profit. I guess, the next area we can run to, we love to talk, Noah, about the importance of purpose. It's a core component of the work that we do as an agency. And so I like even this research that was found that by PwC that said that 79% of employees say purpose is a key factor in their job satisfaction, obviously, right? Because it connects the company's purpose with what they would like to achieve as well as the work. And even in community-focused work, purpose often sits kind of at the center of everything. So I'm just kind of curious, what would you say is the deeper purpose that drives your work, and how does it shape even the way that you approach leadership?
Yeah, for me, I feel deeply privileged to have been able to do the work that I've done, and I'm motivated by so many of the stories that I've collected along the way. So when I kind of rewind, I got to the way I got into community work. I was working at a hotel chain in a management position and got a tour of a local nonprofit that we were sponsoring. I was like, cool, that's a desk-free day for me. I did not think I was going to then be working for that same place that I was touring within 6 months. But when I went on this tour, I really got to hear the stories. So not just the numbers, right, but anchored with real stories. And I realized that I was just kind of moving through the ranks at the hotel because that was my college job. It wasn't my intention. But I wanted to, all of a sudden, I knew what I wanted to do when I grew up, and I was 29 years old. So I'm driven by not necessarily the numbers or even the reports or even the stories in the reports, although a lot of them are good. And I will say at the ToolBank, we are very sincere about putting out good and true stories. But the actual individual people that are served in their own words and as they define themselves, in whatever that could be. So at the ToolBank, for example, when we help a homeowner, this is a story from early 2025. When we lend somebody a sled, literally, it looks like a snow sled, but it's a debris sled, and they're going to recover personal property from their home that burned down 2 days ago. And that's something that as dumb and simple as a sled is, but it helps them get stuff recovered from their home. I mean, those are the kind of stories that animate me and keep me really tied into the work. And I say this often enough. I'm not a very good salesman. I'm though a very good citizen. I want to see the connection between what I do every day and the world that I would want to live in, or the city I would want to move to. And that's kind of my question every week. Like, what do we do this week to be a good citizen or to be an activated citizen? How do we leverage privilege, which could be a warehouse full of tools, but how do we leverage that for the benefit of our neighbors in a way that's not trite and silly, but you can actually point to it and say, well, this week we did this. So I hope I answered your question, but those are the things that really motivate me, and that's my purpose.
Yeah, no, you absolutely did. That was perfect. And I love the point about stories, because those are so key, right? I mean, even some of the best marketing, it's not even marketing, right? When it's a story that you just connect with. So yeah, we can.
All right, let's see.
It looks like we might have an audience question.
Let's pull that up here. All right, it's from LinkedIn. How do we keep a community project going after the initial excitement wears off and the real work begins?
That's a great question.
Yeah, that's a good one. And I'm looking at it, empathizing with the listener, because I've been a part of those groups, right? We're very excited, neighborhood level group. We're doing this, we're doing that. And then it fades. People who were excited, they didn't come to the second meeting. They're not going to be at the third volunteer project. But for me, it's consistency. So, I'm hoping that this is a helpful answer, but I'll just go to the super hyper local level for me. I moved into a community in Baltimore in right before COVID, like literally December 2019. And within 3 months in a new development, we were discouraged from getting together. It was COVID. And what we started doing were community cleanups, equally social as, we were picking up trash and we were using tools from the ToolBank, but it was really about meeting our neighbors in a way that was safe and appropriate for the times. And we started that because I've done a number of these things before, instead of saying, oh, we'll hold it if we get 5 people. I just said, we are doing this. I don't care if it's just me and my partner. I don't care if it's just me and my partner and one other person. I'm not waiting for critical mass. Because I can offer the consistency, I'm just going to keep showing up. And eventually people will just see that's either the guy that picks up trash, or maybe that's the small group that picks up trash. And I say that because if you have the vision and you're kickstarting a project, you can get really disheartened if no one's seeing it yet. But I would simply encourage consistency and modifying expectations about how fast it can scale, because over time, I think a meaningful effort will gather a crowd if you're consistent. And for me, that was true. We actually had 10 or 15 people at the first one. We went down to 2 or 3, but now we're out there and we're back up to the 10 or 15 people, and now we have our own equipment. So it's a sustained effort. And I think part of that was just the consistency, not giving up because we didn't have the numbers that we thought we would or should.
Yeah, I love that. I think it almost reminds me of, what was it, WD-40's former CEO we had on the show that was kind of talking about, I think if you're bringing up an idea, maybe you should just do it too, take that extra leap of, doing it, like trying to own some of that to get it going for sure. Thinking about that question too, it brings up this other question is, like, how can organizations better communicate their purpose to inspire action?
We kind of mentioned, I'm a big fan of storytelling projects, different eye lines. Like when I do a peer-to-peer fundraiser, I want someone to put their face on it. I want a personality to tell a story, because it just changes the way that we receive information. I'm also a big fan of multimedia. So if you're going to do a written blog, do an audio portion, do a video, make it accessible to multiple people. But the storytelling is vitally important. It is so weird because even though I raise resources as my job, it's all in service to something that I heard about for the first time. So I think back to what was it about the ToolBank that resonated so deeply with me? And all I'm trying to do is be excited to share that with other people without the hidden agenda of trying to get money for my job. I only have this job because I was interested in the organization in the first place. So I think storytelling is just a huge part of that, personal storytelling, but also organizational. Who are the people you serve, where that's appropriate. I do serve on the board of a mental health crisis care organization, and specifically we can't share their stories because that's tough. That's not appropriate, but share them where you can and where that's appropriate.
Yeah, definitely underscore and double tap on that purpose piece for sure.
So no, one of the questions when we have businesses on the show is it's around love in business, which we force them to talk about. But so it's easy, I think, in the nonprofit side to see, how love is a part of, the mission of whatever you're doing on that side of things. But I want to ask this question this way to you. What role do you think love should play in business?
I think it should be at the center in the way that, a business is made up of just people, just individual people that have a lot of the same goals and aims and hopes and fears that other people have. And love, it could be overused that as something that is just a general feel-goody word. But if you really think about that intentionality, and that's why I like even what the Bliss Business Podcast stands for, the building love. If you take it as an action verb and really try to build systems that have, you can make a profit and still do better in the world. And it's something that I think should center any good leader. And I kind of think back to, it's an exercise I've heard it called a few different things, but I call it 5 times why. Ask the question why 5 times. Why does HR do this? Why do we do this at the ToolBank? If after the 5th time you ask that question, so if you say, oh, well, we fold gloves at the ToolBank. Okay, why is that important? Well, it's nice to have a right and a left when we loan them to our partners. Well, why is it important? Well, they're safer. Why is that important? Well, they're doing important work. But the 5th time you ask that question, you should be getting to some essence of why you exist in the first place. And that's where you can tell that you have good systems in place. And that's where I think the love comes from, because something positive and affirming for employees. Certainly you can make money, but for the world at large as well.
Yeah, I think the more we've been asking that, to everyone on the shows, so many people end up talking about something that's just foundational to business, even though we don't talk about it. It's that, maybe you don't say the word love all the time, but it's some type of care, some type of empathy, some type of that word. People just don't want to say love, but it's really, the more we dive into it, it's just this foundational thing. And there's all this data we always talk about all around, all those things about employee engagement and, purpose and things like that, where it's, not only the right thing to do and ends up being the most profitable thing to do usually for a business in some way or another, even if it doesn't seem like it at the time.
For sure. Man, what a show. I mean, I think, for the leaders out there, right, take the steps of consistency, define your purpose, be able to kind of demonstrate that love by listening to maybe what your employees would like to do. So Noah, for our listeners, our followers that may be listening to this later on Spotify or Apple or YouTube or LinkedIn, for them that want to learn a little bit more about your work, how can they follow up? Where should they go? How can they find you?
Absolutely. So me personally, LinkedIn, absolutely. Also our website, just toolbank.org. You can see the amazing amount of work we're doing in disaster relief across the country, as well as where there are individual affiliate tool banks. I would also highly recommend, if you want to know if there's a tool bank in your city, go look it up, because it means radically different things for cities that have a tool sharing program like ours. I mean, there's other ones, but we're kind of doing it at a unique scale. And then you can also tune into our blog, which is on our website, where I'm doing a running challenge this summer, and you can watch me try to run like I did 30 years ago, which is the last time I ran with any consistency. So we like to have fun while we're doing it too.
Yeah, ramp up slowly. You know this, but yeah, we're not 16 anymore. And
I've been 16 for 30 years.
Mentally we are, but physically, when you get up there, it's just like, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, you got to ramp up slowly. But yeah, no, I love that you're doing that. I check out the blog on that. It's going to be sort of 90s themed, right? From your
Yep,
era.
I've got my band socks. I've got all my socks purchased for the different bands that I will be featuring that I was listening to in the 90s. And yeah, it's very retro.
Awesome. All right, Noah, thanks for joining us and sharing your perspective on the community building and connection. To our listeners, I mean, I often think that community is one of those pillars of a more conscious approach to business that gets forgotten about a little bit more than some of the others. But consider how you're engaging in your communities, and if it's consistent or inconsistent, that's really kind of a tell too. So see if you can make it. We talked about consistency a bit here. See if you can figure out a way to make it part of your business systems, and that's where you're going to really see the impact. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for your questions, and we'll see you next time on the Bliss Business Podcast.